Have you ever noticed how anxiety feels like a tidal wave that's about to crash over you, and no matter what you do, you can't seem to stop it? You lie awake at night, your mind racing through worst-case scenarios, your chest tight, your breath shallow, and you think to yourself, why can't I just make this stop? Here's what's wild, though. What if I told you that everything you've been doing to fight your anxiety is actually making it worse? What if the ancient Buddhists discovered something about the nature of anxiety over 2,000 years ago that modern psychology is only now beginning to understand, and it completely changes everything? Stay with me here, because what I'm about to share with you is going to fundamentally shift how you see anxiety, and more importantly, how you experience it. This isn't about positive thinking or breathing exercises or any of the usual advice you've heard a million times. This is something much deeper, much more profound, and honestly much more counterintuitive than anything you've probably tried before. Let me start with a story. There was once a Buddhist monk who was known throughout his monastery for being completely unshakable. People would come to him with their problems, their fears, their anxieties, and he would sit there with this serene smile on his face, completely at peace. One day, a young student approached him, frustrated and exhausted from battling his own anxious thoughts. The student said, "Master, how do you do it? How do you remain so calm when the rest of us are drowning in our worries?" The monk looked at him and said something that confused the student at first. He said, "I get anxious too. The difference is I don't get anxious about being anxious." Now at first, this might sound like some cryptic Zen riddle, but hang on, because this single statement contains the entire secret to transforming your relationship with anxiety, and once you really understand it, you'll never see anxiety the same way again. Here's the thing about anxiety that nobody really talks about. The anxiety itself, that initial feeling of unease or worry, that's actually not the main problem. I know that sounds crazy when you're in the middle of a panic attack or you can't sleep because your mind won't shut up, but hear me out. The real suffering comes from what Buddhists call the second arrow. This is one of the most important concepts in Buddhist psychology, and it's absolutely revolutionary when you apply it to anxiety. The Buddha taught that when we experience pain or discomfort, it's like being struck by an arrow. That first arrow is the actual sensation or emotion itself. But then, and this is the crucial part, we immediately shoot ourselves with a second arrow. This second arrow is our reaction to the first arrow. It's our resistance, our judgment, our story about what the feeling means, our desperate attempts to make it go away. And here's the kicker. The second arrow almost always causes more suffering than the first one. Think about the last time you felt anxious. Maybe your heart started racing, or you felt that knot in your stomach, or your mind started spinning with worries. That was the first arrow. Uncomfortable, sure, but manageable. But what happened next? You probably thought something like, "Oh no, not again," or "I can't handle this," or "What's wrong with me," or "I need to make this stop right now." You might have tried to push the feeling away, distract yourself, or you might have spiraled into even more anxiety about the fact that you were feeling anxious. You might have thought about how this anxiety is ruining your life, how you'll never be normal, how you can't function like this. That entire cascade of reactions, that's the second arrow. And if you really pay attention to your experience, you'll notice that the second arrow is where most of your suffering actually lives. The Buddhist insight here is absolutely profound, and it's this. We don't suffer because of our emotions. We suffer because of our relationship with our emotions. We suffer because we resist what we are feeling, because we judge it as bad or wrong, because we create elaborate stories about what it means. And because we exhaust ourselves trying to control or eliminate feelings that are in their essence just temporary sensations moving through our body. Anxiety isn't actually the enemy. Our war against anxiety is the enemy. And this war is one we can never win, because the more we fight our internal experiences, the more power we give them. It's like that old saying about quicksand. The more you struggle, the deeper you sink. Now I know what some of you might be thinking. Are you telling me I should just accept my anxiety, that I should just let it be there and do nothing about it? That sounds like giving up. And I get it, that's exactly what it sounds like at first, and it goes against every instinct we have. Our culture has taught us that problems exist to be solved, that discomfort exists to be eliminated, that negative feelings are obstacles to overcome. We've been conditioned to believe that the goal of life is to feel good all the time, and that anything less than constant comfort and happiness means something is wrong. But here's what Buddhism teaches, and what modern neuroscience is now confirming. Emotions, including anxiety, are not problems to be solved. They're experiences to be experienced. They're information. They're energy moving through your system. They're your body's way of responding to your environment. And when you try to suppress them or fight them, you create a feedback loop that actually intensifies them. Let me explain how this works on a neurological level, because it's fascinating. When you feel anxious, your amygdala, the fear center of your brain, has detected something it perceives as a threat. Maybe it's an actual threat, or maybe it's just your mind catastrophizing about the future. But your amygdala doesn't really distinguish between real and imagined threats. It just sounds the alarm. This triggers your sympathetic nervous system, your fight-or-flight response, and you get all those physical sensations. Increased heart rate, shallow breathing, muscle tension, that pit in your stomach. Now here's where it gets interesting. When you react to these sensations with fear or resistance, when you think, oh no, this is bad, I need to make this stop, your amygdala interprets that reaction as confirmation that there really is a threat. After all, if you're scared of the sensations themselves, your brain reasons, then the sensations must be dangerous. So what does it do? It amplifies the alarm. It creates more of those sensations. You get more anxious about being anxious, which makes you more anxious, which makes you more anxious about being anxious, and you're caught in a loop that feeds on itself. This is what psychologists call the anxiety about anxiety cycle, and it's the primary mechanism that turns occasional worry into chronic anxiety disorders. But here's the beautiful thing. Once you understand this mechanism, you have the power to interrupt it. And the way you interrupt it is exactly what that Buddhist monk was talking about. You stop getting anxious about being anxious. You stop shooting yourself with the second arrow. You allow the first arrow to be there without adding all the resistance and judgment and story on top of it. And this is where the Buddhist practice of mindfulness comes in, but not in the way you might think. Most people misunderstand mindfulness. They think it's about clearing your mind or achieving some blissed-out state of tranquility. But that's not what mindfulness is at all. Mindfulness is simply paying attention to your present moment experience with an attitude of curiosity and non-judgment. Both are attempts to control the uncontrollable, and both create suffering. When it comes to anxiety, we're dealing primarily with aversion. We've labeled anxiety as bad, as the enemy, as something that shouldn't be happening, and we've devoted enormous amounts of energy to trying to keep it away. But here's the paradox. The more you try to avoid anxiety, the more anxious you become. It's like trying not to think about a pink elephant. The effort to suppress creates the opposite effect. This is what psychologists call experiential avoidance, and research has shown that it's one of the biggest predictors of psychological distress. People who are unwilling to experience uncomfortable emotions, who constantly try to avoid or escape them, actually end up suffering more in the long run than people who are willing to experience the full range of human emotions, including the uncomfortable ones. This is because avoidance has a cost. Every time you avoid a situation, because it might make you anxious, you reinforce the idea that anxiety is dangerous and that you can't handle it. You make your world smaller. You miss out on opportunities. And paradoxically, you create more anxiety because now you're anxious not only about the original trigger, but also about all the situations you might encounter that could trigger your anxiety. Buddhism offers a radically different approach, and it's one that modern therapies like acceptance and commitment therapy have incorporated with great success. The approach is this. Instead of trying to eliminate anxiety, expand your capacity to be with anxiety. Instead of avoiding situations that trigger discomfort, approach them with willingness and curiosity. Instead of seeing anxiety as a sign that something is wrong, see it as information, as energy, as a part of the full spectrum of human experience. This doesn't mean you have to like anxiety. You don't have to invite it in for tea or pretend it's pleasant. It just means you stop treating it like an emergency that requires immediate action. You stop believing the story that anxiety is dangerous or that you can't handle it. Because here's the truth that you discover when you actually practice this. You can handle it. You've handled every anxious moment you've ever had up until this point. You're still here. The anxiety has never actually destroyed you, even though it's felt like it might. There's a famous story in Buddhism about a monk named Milarepa who lived in a cave and practiced meditation. One day, when he returned to his cave, he found it filled with demons. Terrifying creatures were everywhere, making horrible noises and threatening him. Milarepa's first instinct was to try to get rid of them. He tried chanting prayers and mantras, but most of the demons remained. Then he tried teaching them about compassion and dharma, and some more demons left, but the biggest, scariest ones stayed. Finally, Milarepa had an insight. He stopped trying to get rid of the demons. Instead, he walked right up to the biggest, most terrifying one, and he said, "I see you, you can stay as long as you like." He even put his head in the demon's mouth, a gesture of complete surrender and fearlessness. And in that moment, all the demons vanished. They were illusions, projections of his own mind, and they had power over him only as long as he was afraid of them and trying to fight them. This story is a perfect metaphor for anxiety. Your anxious thoughts and feelings are like those demons. They seem terrifying and real and powerful. And as long as you're fighting them, resisting them, trying to get rid of them, they maintain their grip on you. But when you turn toward them with willingness and acceptance, when you metaphorically put your head in the demon's mouth and say, "Okay, I'm willing to experience this," something shifts. The anxiety doesn't necessarily disappear immediately, but its power over you begins to dissolve. You realize that it's just sensation and thought, just energy moving through your system, and that you are not your anxiety. You are the awareness that observes the anxiety. You are the space in which anxiety arises and passes. This is a profound shift in identity, and it's at the heart of Buddhist practice. Buddhism teaches the concept of no self or anatta, which is the understanding that what we call the self is not a fixed, solid entity, but rather a constantly changing process. You are not a thing, you're a verb. You're not a noun, you're a flow of experience. And the anxiety you feel is not your anxiety in the sense that it defines you or belongs to you permanently. It's just anxiety, a universal human experience, showing up in this moment in this body. When you stop identifying so strongly with your emotions, when you stop saying, "I am anxious," and instead say, "Anxiety is present," you create a little bit of distance, a little bit of perspective. You're no longer fused with the emotion, you're the observer of it. And from that perspective, you have freedom. You have choice. You don't have to react automatically. You can choose how to respond. This brings us to another crucial Buddhist concept, the difference between pain and suffering. Pain is inevitable in life. It's part of being human. You will experience physical pain, emotional pain, loss, disappointment, fear, anxiety. These are the first arrows, and they're just part of the package of having a nervous system and living in an unpredictable world. But suffering is optional. Suffering is what we add on top of the pain with our resistance, our stories, our judgments. Suffering is the second arrow, and we shoot ourselves with it again and again, often without even realizing we're doing it. The Buddhist path is not about eliminating pain or achieving some state where you never feel anxiety. It's about eliminating unnecessary suffering by changing your relationship to the inevitable pains of life. So, what does this look like in practice? How do you actually apply this Buddhist insight to your anxiety? It starts with awareness. You have to start noticing when you're shooting yourself with the second arrow. You have to catch yourself in the act of resisting, judging, catastrophizing, fighting. This takes practice because these patterns are deeply ingrained. They happen automatically, usually unconsciously. But the more you practice mindfulness, the more you develop the capacity to notice your thoughts and reactions as they're happening rather than being completely identified with them. You might notice thoughts like, "This is terrible," or "I can't handle this," or "What if this never goes away?" And instead of believing these thoughts automatically, you can recognize them as just thoughts, just mental events, not facts. You can say to yourself, there's the thought that this is terrible. Interesting. You're not trying to change the thought or argue with it. You're just noting it, observing it, creating a little space around it. The next step is to bring kind, curious attention to the actual sensations of anxiety in your body. Not the story about the anxiety, Not your thoughts about what it means or why it's happening, but the actual felt sense of it. Where is it located? What does it actually feel like? This is a practice of befriending your experience rather than fighting it. You might place your hand on your chest or belly, wherever you feel the anxiety most strongly, and just acknowledge it. I feel you. You're here. It's okay. This might seem like a small thing, but it's actually profound. You're sending a message to your nervous system that there's no emergency, that the sensations themselves aren't dangerous, that you can handle this. And remember, your nervous system is constantly monitoring your internal state and your reactions to that state. When you respond to anxiety with acceptance rather than panic, you interrupt the feedback loop that amplifies anxiety. Another powerful practice is something called urge surfing, which was developed in the context of addiction treatment, but applies perfectly to anxiety. The idea is that uncomfortable sensations and urges, including the urge to escape or avoid anxiety, come in waves. They rise, they peak, and they fall. The practice is to observe the wave, to ride it without acting on the urge to escape, and to notice that it does indeed pass on its own. You might say to yourself, "This is a wave of anxiety. It's rising now, it's peaking, and now it's beginning to fall." You don't have to do anything to make it fall. It will do that on its own if you don't keep adding fuel to it, with your resistance and catastrophic thinking. This practice builds confidence in your ability to tolerate discomfort and teaches your nervous system that anxiety is not an emergency. Compassion is also absolutely crucial here, and it's something that's emphasized strongly in Buddhist practice. When you're anxious, you're suffering, and you deserve compassion, not judgment. Most of us are incredibly harsh with ourselves about our anxiety. We think we're weak or broken or that there's something wrong with us. We compare ourselves to other people who seem to have it all together, and we feel defective. But here's what Buddhism teaches. Suffering is universal. Anxiety is universal. Every human being on this planet experiences fear and worry. You're not broken, you're human. And the way you talk to yourself about your anxiety matters enormously. If you can bring the same kindness and understanding to yourself that you would bring to a good friend who was struggling, you'll find that the suffering decreases. You might place your hand on your heart and say something.